I believe like if you tried something and you failed, you're awesome for trying. Like, and I just believe that to my core. And that like most people get stuck not even trying because they're afraid of failure.
Yeah.
You did it and you failed, which is the thing you were afraid of. And so like you faced your fears. Look at you go. You know what I mean? And now you get to like do it again with a little less fear because failure isn't as scary as you think. So, and it's not, it says more good about you than bad about you, that you even got yourself into a position where you could fail. What if failure was the key to your next breakthrough? Today, we're reframing failures, seeing it as fuel rather than a stop sign. Today, we're reframing failure, seeing it as fuel rather than a stop sign. Imagine 1830s in England. You're Ada Lovelace, a young woman with a mind for mathematics and a passion for solving complex problems. Society expects you to fit neatly into a life of marriage and motherhood, not equations or engineering, but you're different. But from a young age, you've been fascinated by numbers, logic, and most recently, the idea of machines. One day you hear about the invention that could perform calculations, the analytical engine, a machine being developed by Charles Babbage. It's unlike anything anyone has ever seen, and Ada immediately feels drawn to it. She sees potential beyond the machine's ability to calculate. She imagines it solving problems that people never thought possible. With permission from Babbage, she begins working on notes to describe how this machine could be programmed, an entirely new concept. But it isn't easy. Ada's work on the analytical engine was full of setbacks. She faced constant obstacles. Every time she thought she'd cracked the code, another problem would pop up. The mathematical notations were complex, and the concept of programming was so far ahead of its time that there was no roadmap, no model to follow. On top of that, her health suffered. She endured long stretches of illness that slowed her down and forced her to put her work on hold. But she didn't give up. She kept returning to her work, refining her ideas and notes, knowing that each failure was one step closer to making her vision a reality. Despite all her efforts, Ada didn't live to see her work put into practice. Her notes were largely forgotten in her time, but what she left behind, an algorithm intended for the analytical engine, would later be recognized as the first computer program. And her visionary ideas about computing would inspire the entire field of computer science. Ada's persistence through countless failures paved the way for breakthroughs she could have never imagined. Ada Lovelace's story reminds us that failure isn't the end of a journey, it's a necessary part of it. Each setback she faced was a step toward her ultimate success, even if that success wouldn't be fully realized until generations after her time. Without her willingness to fail and start again, the world may never have seen the potential of computing as we know it today. So, when you think about that project, that idea you've been struggling with, remember, every setback brings you closer. Failure isn't final, it's fuel, bringing you one step closer to what's possible if you just keep going.
End the podcast.
What's not lost on me on this is that like in order to make this whole thing happen, what we're doing today, there's so much. We're like literally we're like downstream of Ada Lovelace today.
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean, I think that's so cool. And I wonder then how many things we don't experience as a world or me as a person because failure ended up being a roadblock.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, right? There's so much that we do today that we don't realize we're sitting in the culmination of someone else's dream. We talked about dreams last week, right? We're sitting in the culmination of someone else's dream. It so easily and so quickly gets lost on us that like we're having this communication on this device because this woman had a passion that drove her past the point of failure to move in this direction, right? And I'm grateful that that she failed and kept getting back up and getting back after it, right? And there's so many other things like that. We drive in these cars that this was their mission and they failed and failed and failed and failed. We live in these houses that are, that are architecturally sound because someone failed, right?
Some house fell on somebody.
Yeah, for sure. Like my garage is about to fall on somebody. That's beside the point. It's good stuff. I think one of the
I would
things,
laugh really hard if it did, and then it fell on like a car, and then this episode comes out, and you get like you get arrested for insurance fraud because now it sounds like you're planning something.
yes, yeah, for sure. The other thing that is amazing to me is that all the people Ivan Batuta, and now, what's her name?
Ada Lovelace.
Ada Lovelace. We're going to know so many people through
That's
this
so
journey.
fun. You just started the list, but like the Wright brothers,
Mm-hmm.
whoever came up with indoor plumbing,
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
praise God for that person. I think, when I think about all these stories and stuff, Ivan Batuta last week is like 1830s, or I'm sorry, 1320s. The Lovelace is in the 1800s. This is like the life that they lived is so disconnected from mine, but like our
Yeah.
personhood is like really still the same. But like, I think, oh my goodness, this person never took a hot shower. That's the thing I always think about. They're like, and then,
Yeah.
all the
Just
people
turn the
that you
lights
really,
on.
there's like, yeah, they just did not walk in and turn the lights on. They didn't have to worry about like, camera lighting because they never had a camera.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyways, some practical steps. So one of the things, it's just fundamental to living. And early in our life, we get frustrated by failure, but we have to learn to be stopped by it. If you think about like learning to walk or learning to talk or whatever, like I think there's a time when for both of our kids and that they were frustrated by falling down on their butt, but they never like just sat there for long. They are pretty soon they were like rolling them little chunky legs forward, trying to like get up and start moving again. And with talking, you could tell that there was stuff they were trying to communicate, but they hadn't figured out that piece yet. And so rather than like just never communicating, they worked through that frustration. So I think innate to us is the idea that like on the other side of this frustration, we have to learn though, and we're taught pretty quickly that failure can and should stop you. You know what I mean? But
Right.
so now we got to now go on the other side of that and go unlearn that.
Yeah.
Because there's some things we need to learn from failure, but the wrong lesson to take away from failure is stop.
Right. And like at some level, we get mature and we start assigning failure to our personhood, right? When you're a
Mm-hmm.
kid and when you're young, you're not like, I can't walk. I guess I'm not a walker, right? You're like,
Right.
I just
Yeah.
fell. You know what I mean? It's like innately,
Yeah.
inherently, we're just like, I fell. I'll try and get back up. And the older we get, I think the more risk there feels like is involved in the things we're trying to do. And when we fail, we start believing I must be a failure or I will never be what I'm trying to do, right? Or trying to become. And then we stop because it's paralyzing. I don't want to be that. And so it's just easier to not try again.
Yeah. 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 So we understand, we're just going to agree that failure is better as fuel.
Get used to it.
Get used to it. So some insights we have, some steps you could take, 3 takeaways. First one is embrace each setback, acknowledge that every no or roadblock is just part of the journey. If you're single, you will be rejected before you
Mhm.
are accepted, most likely. If you're in sales, you will do more being rejected than you will be successful. If you are in accounting, you're going to turn in a ledger sheet that has major errors on it. It's going to cost you and your team money. If you are, whatever your responsibility is, you're going to fail in it. As a
Mhm.
parent, this is probably like
Oh my
you
gosh.
are not going to do as good a job as you set out to do when you found out that you were pregnant. Like you are going to have way more to apologize for than you think. Through your
For
best,
sure.
against your best intention. And it's just part of the journey. I think when you start having kids, you're like, man, I'm so good at life. I can't wait to teach my children about life. And it's like, it's really fast before you're like, oh, really, I'm not very good at my temper. I'm not really good at like
Mhm.
explaining things. I'm not really like, I can't answer all these why questions. And it just gets more and more complex. And like, it's just part of the journey is failing. And was it Michael Jordan? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. It's
Yep.
just how it goes. And Michael Jordan missed more game winning shots than anyone in the history of the world, but
Mhm.
that's not it.
For sure.
Kobe's rookie year, to bounce them from the playoffs, I'm making up the time frame. I just remember that at some point they lost in the playoffs, and it was the final shot, and he missed it, and he sat there looking at the rim kind of for a while, and then the reporter comes over and asks him about it, and he's like, "You must be so disappointed." He's like, "Disappointed?" And the reporter's like, "Yeah, I mean, you were sitting there looking at it for a long time." He's like, "I wanted to figure out why I missed it, so I'd never miss it again," which is so different than like, oh, it's a big bad loss over the summer. We'll get to work on it. All this
Right.
kind of stuff. He was able to go from failure to fix it
Mhm.
in no time, which is why
Yeah.
he's one of the best basketball players in the history of the world because he was able to go from failure to fix it so fast.
Yep.
It's
The
just part of the
alternative,
journey,
the alternative is to not live. He misses a shot, doesn't pick the basketball back up. He's not Kobe Bryant. And
right?
and and you have to not be who you are, right? So we can either get cozy with failing, or we can not live, and it's not fun to not live, because
Right.
you always
It's
know
so small.
where you got stuck, where you got stopped. And so maybe for anyone listening today, whether it's a minute from the failure or 10 years from the failure, uh, it's still okay to get back up today. It's still okay to say, well, today's the day. I just like try again,
Yeah.
whether it be being a dad or that relationship or the thing that you wanted to try in the business that didn't work out, or the partner that you brought in and it's been shaky, whatever the situation is, right? Today, you know, you failed. You're not a failure. It's okay. You
Right.
know, you're human.
Right.
It
That's
means
part
you're
of it.
living. It means you're
It's all
alive.
of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my experience with failure, and we've got some pretty big ones in the rearview mirror, and I'm sure in the road ahead, is that I'm often more concerned with what people are going to think about my failure than else is. Every time I failed something, everybody's been like, "Oh man, tough beat. We love you." Like, and not everyone, but the people who matter. And there's some people who kind of whatever, and the bigger the thing you're trying to do, the more the hater come out, whatever. And but that's just like white noise. It can't matter to you. But the people who care about me most have always just been so supportive. They're like, "Oh man, bad beat. Yeah, hope you learned something from that. Like big mistake. Hope you learned something. But do you want to hang? It's like it's so we internalize and make it part of ourselves, but we don't.
Hmm.
But nobody else does in that way. So step
Very
one,
true.
embrace each setback, acknowledge that as part of the journey. Because when I look at somebody else's failure, I'm like, oh, that's just part of the road. Nobody does everything right all the time. Otherwise, they'd be a billionaire and I wouldn't be friends with me. All right. So acknowledge that every no or roadblock is just part of the journey, part of the road. Step two here is analyze and adapt. So take a constructive approach to review and refine. This is the depersonalizing. So rather than me thinking of like, oh man, I must be a failure. It's like, well, no, I did a bad thing. How did I get there? Was that somebody else's fault? Was that my fault? And this has been the biggest part of my journey through therapy is like, what should I take as like responsibility for? And what has been like somebody else's responsibility? And downstream from that, my responsibility to I have a responsibility to not allow those kinds of people in my life and all that kind of. So it's not like
Hmm.
we're shirking responsibility for anything, but it's like what happened here. And so being able to review, refine from like a step off of yourself is awesome. So like I generally like I believe like if you tried something and you failed, you're awesome for trying. Like and I just believe that to my core. And that like most people get stuck not even trying because they're afraid of failure.
Yeah.
You did it and you failed, which is the thing you were afraid of. And so like you faced your fears. Look at you go. You know what I mean? And now you get to like do it again with a little less fear because failure isn't as scary as you think. So and it says more good about you than bad about you that you even got yourself into a position where you could fail. Because I think maybe a lot of people don't. But so we can only analyze and adapt if we aren't like if this isn't like tied to us personally.
Yeah. And I think, the other side of failure is not all failure is even a bad scenario or situation. Like there's ways where we
Oh yeah.
fail as a father, we fail as a husband, we fail as a business owner towards our employees. And like those are real ways we have to own up to our mistakes and what have you. There's other instances where it's like, I'm going to go push live on this website, and 6 weeks later, no one's come to it yet. I failed. Well, you didn't do something bad. There's just maybe different things you could do. And so
Yeah.
the failure isn't, I think oftentimes we see dreams cut short by failure because we go, I thought I did all the right things and it just failed. And so I guess I must not be able to figure this out versus, okay, there's a lot of wins that went into play before you recognize that there was also a failure, a
Yeah.
singular failure.
Yeah.
And so can we analyze that? I think the analyzing piece, the point that of all of this is that we need to evaluate. You got to
Yeah.
evaluate not just when things go bad, but also start evaluating when things are going right, because it's going to
Yeah.
give you answers for when the failure comes, right? The site is not live, but I did get a site up, you
Hmm.
know, and I do have the right information there, and it does explain what my business is doing, just people
Yeah.
aren't seeing it. And so maybe not all of this is a failure. Maybe I just didn't do something that I don't know how to do, going back to who can I get connected to and what's the next step I could take and what have you, right?
Yeah. So that's super interesting, and I think it's important. And I hadn't thought about it in prepping this. Failure can start to
It's right here.
overshadow all the good. You know what I mean? It starts to like bring out and like and just the whole thing looks like a failure. You do that with your
Hmm.
person, like I must be a failure. It's like, well, you did something that failed. That's very different. And then also you did a lot of great and good things in there as well. And you think about being a professional sports team fan. Every year, everyone fails except for one team. And but does that mean that every team season is a failure? Or is there like so many good things to look at, like, or different things along the road? Like, yeah, I think it's like, it's not all or nothing.
Hmm.
And I think it's appropriate to kind of be able to dice that out and say, like, we're going to celebrate wins and we're going to learn from failures.
Yeah, there's wins within the wins and there's wins within the losses, right? And I think that's why I love the arena of sports because, every quarter they have to evaluate and make adjustments, and every half they have to evaluate and make adjustments. After every game they have to evaluate and make adjustments. After every season they have to evaluate and make adjustments. It's why the personnel looks different. The players tend to look different. The systems kind of tweak and change. The plan from kickoff to the kickoff of the second half change because something didn't work, right? And I think the best teams in the arena of sport often they win in ways we don't know they're winning, but they know they're
Yeah.
winning, right?
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
we won the most games. Well, it's not as simple as that, right? There's
Yeah.
so many wins that have to take place to win a game.
Right.
And
And you
and
can see it among the great teams that it just shows up. And you're like,
yep.
man, why every time when they need to do this, they do, but nobody else can. When they need to stop, when they need to put the ball in the bucket, like, how do they get it every time? And it's like, well, there's so many other things along that road. And so we embrace each setback, acknowledging that every no is just part of the journey. We analyze and adapt, so we take a constructive approach to review and refine, and then we celebrate every attempt. We value each effort as progress, not as an endpoint. So by trying, we celebrate that because we're doing something. We aren't paralyzed by the fear of failure.
Yeah. And I think to your point, Lat, on the previous episode, like we're trying in a direction. We're not just doing busy work here because busy work, like it might keep you busy, but it won't get you towards your goal, right? And so like we're taking steps of action towards a thing in a direction, and that is to be celebrated. I didn't know this, now I know this.
Yeah.
Celebrate that.
Yep.
I've
Leveled
never
up.
put this into action. I just put this into action. Did it work? Don't know yet. I'm too busy celebrating that I did it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and then I
And
can
we'll
and
and
then
we'll
I can
get there. Yeah.
analyze, and then I can track it, and then I can
Yep.
adapt, and then I can change it, right? Um,
But if you're afraid to fail so much that you are afraid to try, well, then you'll never fail, but you'll also never succeed, and the journey won't start. You can't do it.
you never get to eat the cake, and eating the cake is always the best part. Actually, I'm more of a cupcake guy.
Ooh. Ooh. Um, all right. So how does this work out in life? I'll say for my life, we say everything is an experiment. So at our house, we don't make decisions, we experiment, meaning there's no pressure because we don't know what the outcome's going to be. If I make a decision or if I try an experiment, I don't know what the outcome's going to be. But if I make a decision, now that's tied to me. But if we're just experimenting here, we're just trying it. So we tried our not oldest son, Leo, going to school. We tried him not homeschooling, and we're going to just experiment. And that's just how that goes. And so we do this with all sorts of things. We're experimenting with a new way to budget. We're experimenting with, that whatever. And rather than making it my decision, trying to talk Christina into it, whatever, it's just like, hey, we're going to experiment with this stuff together. And we kind of build the the parameters around that experiment, and then we just execute it. And then if we like the outcome, we learn that lesson. If we don't like the outcome, we learn that lesson. So we do that in business, we do that in home. If we're having an issue, we have a set of data and we have like ideas about what can fix it. Rather than saying like we're going to do this and it's going to fix it, we say we're going to try
Hmm.
this and hopefully it fixes it. And then it's like at the end of an experiment, you make your observations, your problem. This is the problem. Here's my hypothesis. Here's my experiment. Then we're going to do it. Then we're going to make some observations about the experiment. As we tried to do this in business, we were going to try to do 4-day work week instead of 3, whatever. Here's what we learned. And productivity went up in all these days or whatever, but we really started dropping the ball in this place, whatever. And then we draw conclusions.
Uh-huh.
And that's like, so we just use scientific method about life a little bit. And rather than trying to look into the future and say, if we do this, then this will happen. It's like everything. And so some of our experiments are failures, but like you never say an experiment's a failure because you still get you still get to observe things and you still get to draw conclusions. And so like the process of going through the scientific method in your life as an experiment is that like, it's always successful. And this is Thomas Edison, right? I just learned that one more thing can't become a light bulb. And that's a successful experiment. So basically every experiment is successful if you learn from it. And so like you can't really fail if you're experimenting. So this is kind of how we approach life, setting up our rhythms, like setting up all this stuff. Like, let's try if we all sit down for dinner this week and see how we feel about it. Let's try if we just do it 3 times. Let's try if we, rather than like, let's try keeping our phones away from our beds. Let's try keeping our phones at our beds. Let's try turning off all electronics by 9 p.m. Let's try turning them off at 7. Let's try, rather than saying like, we're going to do like, otherwise you have to get it right the first time, or you feel like it's a failure and you walk away from it. So we just experiment.
I think that point takes the pressure off of your life a little bit. It's like you either experiment or you don't. But if like we're going to be the family, we're the kind of family that always eats dinner together. Well, good luck having teenagers who have schedules and lives outside of your family, right?
Right.
Then you fail in your model. But if your life is like an experiment, and I think you bring up a good point, you take a little bit of pressure off because, like you said, you don't fail experiment. You either do it or you don't. And when you experiment, when you do the thing, when you try to say, hey, this might solve this problem in our life, this might solve this problem in our business, this might solve this problem in whatever the thing you're trying to solve it is, you're setting yourself up to have more knowledge, to have more information, and to be able to guide your life better rather than go, this must be the way. This is the way. We have to do this. And then you're the guy who's like, never knows the way because it doesn't always work, right?
Right.
And I think like it's a better way to approach your life, the scientific method. Who would have thought that this would be a great way to approach your life?
Big science on Booked Local. All right. So challenge then. Identify one failure from your life. So if you're listening, think about something that like when I say failure in your mind, you're like, this is it. And so I've got one that comes up. I got a couple that come up. It's a laundry list. The older I am, the bigger the list. I think of like, is a failure in your life, but like think about one you got stuck on and then reframe it. You can put it in I was just trying to learn this. I was just trying to learn that. I was just trying to be. So reframe it and then answer, what did I learn from it? Hey, Hope.
Hey, Hope.
We are in the middle of recording a podcast.
I hope.
You are not supposed to be out here, but we can wrap up with hope.
Yes.
I think we can. We can put a
hope.
child on a podcast. We're going to end with hope because all failures lead to hope, right, Bun? So identify one failure from you learned in your life, reframe it and answer, what did you learn from it? So what did we learn today? That failure can be a bridge to new opportunities. Step 1, we're going to embrace each step back. Failure is just part of the journey. We're going to analyze and adapt. We're not going to be afraid of our failures. We're going to dig into them to learn from them. And we're going to celebrate the